as we enter introduction to meditation, what we're really looking at is the fact that the brain can only go into meditative states when it begins in a certain state. So we talked about this a little bit last night, but I'm just going to kind of go into a deeper explanation of how that works. And so when we're looking at meditation, this idea of using meditation to alleviate stress, depression, anxiety, things that are states of suffering, it becomes almost an impossible task. It's kind of like that concept of being in a really negative thought and having somebody say, well, just think positive, right? The brain isn't capable of making that kind of shift just immediately. And so a lot of people that are really adept at meditation, the reason why they're adept at meditation is because they are unconsciously, or maybe they do have conscious participation in evolving the brain to a certain point. But for somebody that's new to meditation, or a person that struggles with meditation, they're just missing those kind of early steps. So we're going to talk about those, and we're going to talk about meditation as a 4-phase practice. So in phase 1 of meditation, what we're doing is we're making sure we're not in a triggered or fight or flight state. Now, the ability to meditate when triggered in fight or flight is impossible. Actually, meditation state exists at the other end of the spectrum from the fight or flight state. So when we're in a fight or flight state, this is when we're experiencing any suffering, any negative emotion, any negative feelings, stress, anxiety, depression, anger, fear, frustration, judgment, lack of motivation, fatigue, just anything that doesn't feel like, anything that doesn't feel good in the body is a sign that we are somewhat, the amygdala is somewhat triggered. So it may not be a big trigger, but so the brain does not want to come into a state and just be in silence. Getting centered and becoming fully present is actually just preparing our brain to meditate. And I'm going to talk about the actual stage of meditation next. But the first thing we want to do before we can meditate, before we are biologically able to meditate, we want to enter a centered state. So good ways to do this are things that we talk about in phase 2, like the non-dominant hand coloring, things like that. Another thing we can do is to do something like a body scan, some kind of mindfulness practice that brings us into the moment. So you can do that simply. You don't have to do anything with the body scan. You can just observe. You can say, okay, I'm aware of my toes. I'm aware of each toe. Go through each toe, both feet. Be aware of the pad of the toe. Be aware of the toenail. Now I'm aware of the ball of my foot. I'm aware of the arch and the heel. So just bringing awareness to everything. By the time you move through your whole body, you should be in a centered enough state to meditate. Other things we can do are any meditative practices. So things like chanting, things like bowls, the singing bowls. We can do rosary, tai chi, yoga, anything that is a centering practice that are commonly taught as meditative practices. Now, when we're moving into the meditative state, what we really want to do is move into an active listening state. What we're really doing in meditation is building communication between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. So if you look at the right hemisphere, so both our left and right hemispheres are almost identical in our brain. They do, if you remove one, the other one will compensate. But there is a difference in the way the right and left brain functions, and that is that the right brain tends to be more expansive in its thought. It sees big picture, it sees from a broad perspective, it sees in a non-definitive way. So it sees at a level of essence. Whereas the left brain is more definitive, more concrete. And so what we're doing is the word meditate actually means active listening. So when you hear someone say something like, I'm going to go meditate on something, they're not going to go sit in silence. They're going to go contemplate a bigger realization of something. They're going to go expand their mind to something. So in this, what we want to do is we want to be able to expand our consciousness. And the way to do this is through the communication between the left and right brain. So you need to take the left brain and have it observe one of the big thoughts in the right brain and try to quantify that thought, try to articulate it. This is why I always say meditation without articulation equals no progress. In the fact that if we just hang out in the right brain, if we just hang out in expansive thought and in all the feelings of essence that feel good, the peace and the serenity and those experiences of meditation that are bliss, but then we don't translate that to our life, we're not gaining the full benefit of meditation. Meditation, I always define it as this. Meditation is not about moments of stillness in a life of chaos. Meditation is designed to create a life of stillness that easily manages chaos. And the way we create this is through innovative thinking, through being able to have expansive thought in any situation. So no matter what the situation is, we come from more solution-based thinking. And so what we're doing in a meditative practice, the whole reason meditation exists, again, is to expand us, which means it's there to move us from what we know and have been to what we don't know and have never been, right? So what we're accessing in these meditative practices is what we don't know and have never been. And so in order to do this, we have to access information beyond our current boxes, beyond our current definitions. And so we're going to expanded thought for that. So what you're really thinking about when you're thinking about creating better communication between the left and right hemispheres of the brain is you really want to think of it as, okay, I want to be able to, from the limited perspective I have now, from the boxes of my reality, from the confirmation biases that currently exist in my world, I want to be able to realize new thought, understand a new potential, expand my thinking. And so this is what we're training the brain to do. And what we're doing when we're meditating is training it like working a muscle, right? So in the meditative practice, we can eventually get so adept at that communication that we can come up with innovative thought, vision, infinite potential in any situation. We tend to live in an innovative way, an inventive way. Which brings us to the fourth stage of meditation. Now, this can be some of the most complicated, or it can be the most complicated part of meditation, one of the hardest things to do, and that is the level of contemplation. So contemplation is about how we handle this new information we just conceived. So think of it as an epiphanal state, or that you just had a realization of some kind. Now, we have certain tendencies when it comes to new information like this. So when it comes to innovation or invention, one of the first things we do is we tend to think it's future-based. And instead, we have to understand that it's not future. It's what exists now that I'm not seeing. So when we get that innovative thought, that epiphany, it's not something we have to bring into form. We don't have to go to work on it. The term I always use is it's information, not instruction. So you're not getting a to-do list. You're just getting an awareness of what's available that you weren't conceiving before. Now, one of the other mistakes we make is we tend to live in convergent learning practices, particularly in our country. And so we tend to want to take new information and analyze that new information based off of what we were thinking before. So we basically take this new information that's out here and force it into the box of what we already know, right? So we restrict it, and because if it's truly new information, we can't possibly understand it right now. If we understand it, it's not new, right? And so one of the other things we tend to do is we tend to dismiss what we don't agree with and only keep what we do. So a lot of times these opportunities, these learning practices actually just become validation practices, right? Where you see people go into meditation and just get a bunch of information there and say, oh yeah, I knew this. So all they're really getting is validation and confirmation rather than any expansion of thought. And so what we really want to do when we're in a meditative practice is to get expansion of thought. We don't want to just validate what we already know, because there's no growth in that. There's no new possibility in it. So when we're in these contemplative stages, what we really want to do is we want to allow the new information to exist without understanding it. So it's something that we're consciously aware of, but that we don't have understanding of yet. So it's about letting it sit in our awareness unknown. Now, when we allow something new to sit in our awareness unknown, the subconscious mind immediately goes to work seeking knowledge to it. We are seeking to gain knowledge. Our subconscious mind is the most adept part of our brain. Our conscious brain is nowhere near as adept as our subconscious. So think of walking, for example. We walk all day long and we do it subconsciously. Imagine intentionally trying to walk, intentionally thinking of picking up your leg and bending it the right way and planting your foot this way. And you're going to be nowhere near as adept at walking if you do it consciously. So what we want to do is not to consciously try to change things. We want to put our subconscious mind to work. So as we enter contemplative states and we allow ourselves to be aware of this new thing without fully understanding it, our subconscious brain takes over and we gain more information in a more expanded way. So that's contemplation. And I'll talk about that even a little bit more after the meditation when I talk about the practices I recommend at home. But ultimately what we're doing is we're trying to make sure we're moving through these 4 stages every time we meditate, and particularly focused on the first 3 stages. So again, before any meditative practice, making sure we're not triggered. Positive sensory stimuli, deep breathing, something just to make sure that we're in a relaxed state of mind. Again, setting up a specific regular meditative practice is a good thing to do. The second thing we want to do, again, is to become more centered. So this is using a lot of pre-existing meditative practices, things like mindfulness. You can do the body scan, things like chanting, things like rosaries, things that bring focus into the moment and bring us fully present in our practice, which is triggering the prefrontal cortex. So again, you can use phase 2 practices for this, things like non-dominant hand coloring, yoga, tai chi, the thing that you might be learning, the new things. So whatever you're doing for phase 2 that's bringing you to a really centered state. And then we want to move into the active listening. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to do that in the meditation practice tonight. It's also what we want to do as we continue practices at home. A lot of people end up having the issue where they come back to me and say, I can do this in a room with you. I can do it when I'm with you, but when I get home, it just doesn't come. And the reason why is because they're not making sure they're doing the other practices first, not making sure they're doing the phase 1, phase 2 practices first to get into the right state of mind to be able to meditate. Questions or clarifications on their meditation practices that I can answer while we're waiting.
So step 3 is where you have the epiphany.
Step 3, yeah. Well, what you're doing is you're training your brain to be able to have epiphany. So the question is, if the computer didn't pick it up, is step 3 where we have the epiphany? And in a sense it is. So what we're really doing in meditation is training our brain to have that strong connection between the left and right hemispheres so that anytime we need an epiphany, it's available. And so generally when we're doing it, we'll have, sometimes when we're doing the practice, an epiphany will come in that moment. Sometimes we'll do the practice, and then the next day or the day a couple days later, we'll have an epiphanal moment. But really, as long as we're entering, and this is probably a good thing to describe that I don't think I did. So we're entering this state of observation. So when we're doing the active listening, we're in a fully observational state. But we're not observing the moment. It's not the same as mindfulness. So we're not observing what exists. We're in an observational state of infinite possibility. So now we're observing that expanded thought of the right brain. So we're in the state of observing what we've never been able to conceive of before. So sometimes that can be create an epiphanal moment in that moment, but sometimes it's just the practice of building and strengthening those connections that cause us to later have epiphanies. So I've had it happen both ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love what you're saying, because this is what I realized. I've been back painting again, and paintings that I started many years ago but stopped, and then I went back to school and I'm readdressing them, and the ability to get into the details that I couldn't quite get to before. It's I mean, the details are coming out and they're becoming more alive, and I'm like, this is what it's about.
Yeah.
To be able to get into that detail or help it just come out.
Right. Yeah. To be able to access it
Yeah.
at will. Yeah. Which is really, I think, what it's about overall, is to say, I'm no longer bound by, it comes when it comes, or it might be random or sporadic, or some days I have it, some days I don't. It's kind of like the concept of writer's block.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about that a lot when I work with writers, that it's about completely eliminating writer's block.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me now at the level I am, I can't conceive of ever having writer's block.
Yeah.
Like I could write 24/7 for months and never run out of words, right? Because that left brain just always has access to the right brain. And so with the right brain, and one of the things that's the reason why even people that can hang out in that place of infinite possibility, a lot of times the reason that they don't translate it into their life is because that right brain doesn't have the language centers to translate it. We really do need to carry it over. We really do need to articulate it. That's the most important part of the process, is to put into words what we can't conceive. Because once we train the brain to be able to articulate what it couldn't conceive, then anything's possible, right? Any invention, any innovation, it becomes possible, because we're living in that state where it just again, people talk about flows, and I don't want to promote the kind of flow state that's a comfort zone. That's like, I'm just going with the flow. It's more the state where the expression of new idea comes with ease, and it's unefforted. Yeah. Does that make sense? That answer it. Cool.
One of the things that I've noticed about my mythology is that I have thought in the past that I would like to know more about the geology of the Wasatch Front. And it came in my mythology, you need to take a class in geology. Now, I don't know whether I can try that, because I'd already thought of it before, but it just felt so good.
Well, and a lot of the time, when we get realizations in our meditative practices that prompt us to do things in life, the thing we're doing in life may or may not be a meditative practice. So it's not like necessarily taking a class is going to be a meditative practice. It can be, but it might open a door that creates the opportunity for a more meditative life, right? Because that's the biggest thing, is the goal of this is not be meditation, not be a place that we go to and feel like an escape, like a vacation place. We want it to be something that we, hi, how are you tonight?
Pretty good.
we want it to become a lifestyle. We want it to become the place where we exist. So sometimes what you're getting are functions in life you can do that will foster that state more. And sometimes it's just because the brain, if we've left something unresolved in the brain, it wants to resolve it. And it resolves it one or two ways. It either comes up with the solution, like we'll go to this, and then you get to have what you were wanting, or it lets go of it for something else, right? So as long as there's not something that's a deeper longing that says, no, this is the thing I will release everything for because of the size of its potential. Sometimes it's just giving us what brings us peace of mind by coming to completion, right? Coming to a place of wholeness with things.
I don't know. I just don't know.
But it's worth going.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. Classes are good. They're good for your.
It seemed to be something I've really been wanting. I've been hoping to meet somebody on these hikes that knows about geology, and it's not happening. And so this seems like the right way to go.
And when you think about that state, that maybe too, you think about the concept of identifying who you are through others. Maybe it's better not to meet somebody that knows about geology and just learn it yourself.
No.
Right? Because then it becomes more internal.
Yes.
It's an identifying factor.
I actually like it better.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Awesome. So we have about, I'm going to start the meditation promptly at 7:15. So because I have committed to do so. I was semi-prompt. It wasn't quite 6:30, but I did what I could. So we're just talking about any questions people have about their meditation practice, anything that I can answer while we're allowing 7:15 to arrive. And then we're going to do a trajectory. I think I know what I want to do. So we're winging it, which means a good meditation practice. But there's been a kind of conversation showing up this week that I think this will, it'll be a good practice for. But I'm not quite sure how it works yet.
So I kind of have a question, and yes, I do have a question. So I creatively seen a project that I want to work on, but I'm kind of trying to want to explore some of the specifics, like the theme. Like I want to do a picture book, but and I kind of know some of the ideas of themes and things like that. But is there something that you would suggest for me to really clearly hone in?
Well, I probably suggest the opposite. So asking the question of if I'm going towards a creative process, and should I hone in and focus on something? Actually, creative processes should be observational. Otherwise, we're not fostering the expansion of consciousness, right? We're just swimming in the pool we already have. So anything right now that you could hone in on is consciousness you already possess. The better thing to do is to be in an observational state with it. You could do something like a reverse goal setting to do that, so that it still maintains the perspective of what's the word I want? Is you're still using the perspective of being in an active listening state, right? If you're doing something like the reverse goal setting. If you're doing also, one of the things you could do, like say for example, it's all the pictures. You could pull what inspires you and pull it all and start putting it together and let the theme reveal itself to you too. As an inspiration, as an innovation, right? So you're kind of putting together what will be there. So that's kind of what happened for me with the brain, and the fact that I was really studying the brain to try and cure the condition of PTSD. But what I've discovered as I've been gathering information is that the chemistry of the brain is not what's important. The brain function, the evolution of brain function is what's important. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that in the beginning. What I knew is that I wanted to explore, but where I explored, where the information came from, what showed up for me, I didn't try to hone in on anything. I really let that innovation lead me. And then eventually a clarity came that went, oh, this is what I'm really doing. And I'm sure it will happen again,
Yeah.
where I think I know what I'm doing. And then I have a realization of a deeper level of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Does that help?
No, yeah, I'm sure that will, I mean, that will be part of the process of it. But I think, you know, me coming from art school, and, you know, they teach you to really, you know, have the idea and to, you know, to really go through a process, if you must, you know, if you can call it that, to in that creative process. And so sitting in observation, yeah, I'm already feeling kind of, I feel like I'm already arriving at that place where I want to be, where I think, I don't want to say flow, but it is a flow, and will occur. And I think that it will come through that.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing. That's why I often say that creative process isn't necessarily active listening.
Yeah.
Some people create art, create books, like looking at a lot of the structures of literature are the same. You know, being a writer and getting involved in learning writing has been a similar journey, where you can get so caught up in structure, and it has to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to make sure you're doing this, and it's great information, but it's not expansive information, right? So I have to be approaching something I don't know that I can't understand, or it's not expansive. It's just not. If I'm directing the bus the entire time, it's not new. It's still me directing the bus. And so it's got to come from what I already know, right? And we can learn. We can go to school and learn from another person what we don't know, and that's expansive to an extent, but we're still bound by their limitations, right? When we're in these active listening states, there's no bounds. That what we can conceive of is just beyond anything. So I think that the most moving art is the art that was created in that way, where a person discovered their own soul in the process. Yeah. So it is a fine line, especially understanding. So one of the things I do, being a creative writer, I do a lot of pantsing when I write. And so, well, all my writing is pantsing. So anyway, I just write. I don't outline. I don't follow any structure, any rules. And then when I go through editing, there are certain really key rules to writing to where I'm not just going on about what interests me, but can actually engage a reader. Certain questions, like, does the main character resolve something, things like that. And so then I can go back and take all of those literary rules that I find important and make sure I've covered them and just tweak things. But the initial flow of it, I'm observing the story. I have to be watching the story reveal itself to me. I can't contrive it in any way. So I think it's like allowing the project to reveal itself to you, letting it lead.
I think I have a tendency to say, you know, I'm creating, like, what is going to come from me. I get in that, sometimes I step into that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see the difference between those two. I mean, I can definitely feel the difference.
Yes. They feel very different. Yeah. So I'm not bringing something into form. I'm observing something as it emerges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
examples of art that does that really well?
Well, I think of things like, for example, I talk a lot about, so in case I didn't pick up, we're asking about art that shows examples of that. And I think I can look at things like Michelangelo's David, where I get a specific feeling observing David. And I think it's the feeling Michelangelo had. I think it translates. I think that there's some of that in Pollock's work that I feel it more than I see it. Like there's that thing that I don't fully understand about it, where it's speaking to me at an essence level rather than at a definitive structure level. I'm the same too with I just had a mental block. Monet. I get that a lot with Monet.
I
as well.
almost said my name.
Is that Monet? Yeah, you were hearing it before I heard it in my own head. Monet, I feel that way about a lot of, and it's not everything, but I think there are these moments where it's kind of like Michelangelo would talk about. He says, he always said, I don't decide what to sculpt. The stone speaks to me and tells me what it wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think whenever we're saying it from that perspective, like, oh, that book wrote itself, or I just felt like I had to make this specific creation, like it had to exist, things like that. I think anything really, then it's driven by the soul, and really the soul and accessing that information is going to be foreign. It's an expansion of consciousness, so it's going to be foreign to who we know ourselves to be. It's going to be something that's outside our box, because it has to move us, right? To move the observer of it, I think. So all of those, I'm trying to think of any others that there are some movies. The movie like Stars on Earth is really powerful that way. It's about it's about a kid with dyslexia, but the person who created the movie had dyslexia, and they brought, every scene has a different kind of music, has a different filmography to it. It like it's so like dramatically different. It's almost like seeing something where in one scene you're having classical music, and in another scene it's thrash metal, and the way they film it changes in each one. And that's, I think, because I think the person who created it wanted you to have the experience of dyslexia. And so he shared, having had it, being the filmmaker, having had it, was sharing that experience through continually changing the way he approached the media. And so it was a hugely moving
Was it
experience for me.
available on Hulu or?
I got it at the library a long time ago. So it's been out for a really long time, but it's a fantastic movie. It's definitely worth seeing. It was a Sundance winner, like Stars on Earth.
Oh, like Stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are a few like that where it's kind of like it's almost like sometimes even this doesn't make sense why I love this so much, but I have to. Yeah.
It's like not formulaic, and yet an indescribable formula.
Indescribable is the key word there, right? Because if we're
just like-
talking right brain, indescribable.
Yeah.
So the things we can't quantify
For
or
me,
really
like, one
comprehend.
of my favorite films, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Mhm.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, there are so many of them, and it's just where you see the person, I don't know, kind of lays their soul out on the canvas or the film or something else. Okay, it is 7:13. So I'm going to explain what we're doing to the extent that I can in the trajectory shift today. And then we're going to do that. So we're going to start the meditation. So I've had this interesting kind of conversation happening this week, and I talk a lot about this working as a muse, that generally the people I'm working in private sessions with will have a general theme to what's happening that week for everyone. It's happening for me at some level of my consciousness as well. And the conversation this week has really been about this point we reach in these practices. And I think a lot of people exist at this level. So it's not necessarily just the people that are doing this program, but it's where we seem to have two identities within ourselves, right? We have that inner critic, the fear-based amygdala, that's saying, I can't do it, I'm afraid, I don't feel motivated, I'm gonna go have a nap. All these things we do to say, I'm not gonna, and particularly this week we've been talking about, I don't want to do the practices, or I can't do this, or this will never work, so it's kind of the naysayer in our mind. So that's the amygdala, because it makes its decisions from fear. And then you have this who we are in the insula that's saying anything's possible. Of course I can, right? There's all this capability and confidence. And sometimes we get to the point in our process where they're existing in our mind together, arguing with each other, right? Where we're like, I'm going to do this. And it's like, no, don't do this. Come on, you can just go do this instead. And so I thought of playing that into the trajectory shift, and moving out of this part of the brain that is the amygdala part of the brain, and connecting with what our journey is if we're just in that insular part of the brain.
I'm already yawning.
I must be on the right track.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm
I must be.
positive.
So I left my keyboard over there. I'm trying to decide. I'm kind of tempted to just get up and run and get it really quick.
Where is it? Can I get it for you?
Sure, if you want to just grab my purse is either hanging over there, or it might be on the shelf underneath where that hat is. See where that straw hat is?
Okay.
My purse might be under. That's great. Thank you. That way I don't have to abandon the people online, and just vanish from the screen.
Password purse is there.
Yeah, that's the one I want. That one. It's just, it should be inside of that. Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
I assume this is all you want.
Okay. So how exactly we're gonna do it, I'm not 100% sure, but those are usually my best meditations. Thank you so much for grabbing that for me. I had all this time to prepare, and yet missed that one. Okay. So yeah, we're just going to wing it. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with the meditative state and getting into that space, and then we'll just go from there. Trust it's all going to work out. So let the insula run this one. So what we're going to do is, again, start in that first stage of all meditation where it should all start, which is just making sure we're not in any level of a triggered state. So we're just going to do that tonight by doing some conscious breathing. So we're not necessarily trying to breathe in any specific way. I want you to just become aware of your breath. Become aware of the way it moves in your body. Do you prefer to inhale through your nose, through your mouth? When you inhale, is it your chest or your rib cage that expands, or is it your abdomen? You're not judging or thinking it should be anything specific, and not forcing the breath, but just becoming aware of what the experience of inhaling is for you. And then as you become aware of that, becoming aware of exhaling Does your body just naturally release the air? Or do you exhale intentionally? Dan, are you most comfortable in exhaling out of your nose or out of your mouth? What is the preference of your body? When you don't decide, when you don't have any rules of how it should be, what is your natural inclination? Now, organically moving into phase 2 to becoming more centered, the next stage of meditation. Just become mindfully aware of your breath in a way where you almost can feel it expanding out through your entire body. That concept that each time we inhale, we're bringing in oxygen to the blood. We're exhaling carbon dioxide. We're exhaling what the body no longer needs, what it's used. So thinking about each inhale bringing new life, new potential, new possibility to the body. Each exhale, letting go. Letting go what the body no longer needs. Just feeling that oxygen in your veins, moving throughout your entire body. And when exhaling, those same veins on the other end of the circuit, carrying out what you don't. The heart pumping it, cleaning it. Always doing this. Not needing your participation or your conscious intent. Circulation just always happening in the perfect way your body knows how to do it. Now, as we shift into this trajectory shift, I want you to bring your mind to an even deeper level of that blood that has everything that the body's used, everything that the body's needed, everything that we've been. So existing within this, existing within it at a molecular level in our body, at a cellular level, at a DNA level, is everything we've been. Not just in our life, but in the lives of our ancestors and the life of human existence. All these many things we've learned to do to be safe, to be strong, to be aware, and even at moments to be inspired to become who we are today in this moment. So this path we've walked, this journey we've walked, the moments that we've judged, that we feel are failures, the DNA we've adopted and wished we didn't. The limitations that we gained growing up. Everything that made us anything less than the full potential of what we could have been. All of it existed for a reason. It was something at some point that made someone, whether it was us or someone in our genetic line, it was something that made them safe. That was the right decision at the time for survival. It's all the stuff that we carry with us, that we inherently accept as our definition, as our consciousness, as the only reality that could exist. It feels so inherent that it seems like something more than blood rushing through our veins. It feels like bone and muscle and everything that we call our reality. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's how we've identified. It's where we've stood and said, this is who I am. I want you to sit with the concept of who you've been, of how you've identified, who you've decided you are. And I want you to think of it like blood. The blood that moves through your bones, through your muscles. And I want you to think of just exhaling it. Just being willing to breathe it out. To allow all those veins that rush through those muscles, through those bones, to gather potentially everything, but particularly those things that are the decisions, the mechanisms, the things that worked once that are no longer working for you. And just breathe them out. Focus on that exhaling breath. Don't worry about the inhale right now, but just take deep inhales and think of every time I exhale, the limitations of my childhood, letting it go. Exhaling the DNA I was born into, all the conditions of that DNA, letting it go. The things that were enormous successes at some point that are no longer exactly what I need, letting it go. Realizing that all of it brought you to where you are today. It brought you to the place of all the good in your life and all of the things you don't feel are good. But all it did was bring you to today. You are not bound to it for tomorrow. With each exhale, just letting it go. And not even because there's a specific reason to in this moment, other than it's who you've been. You've already experienced being this person. What might be possible if you were just willing to try being someone new? So I want you now to just kind of allow yourself to naturally shift, easily shift to that inhale. What am I bringing in? The letting go is natural now. You don't have to think about it. With each new inspiration, inspire means breathe in. With each in-breath, what am I discovering? What am I becoming? What is possible for me? Bringing that air in, that life, that oxygen, feeding the muscles, feeding the bone, feeding all the organs in the body. Choosing to live, to thrive. And now what I want to do is I want to give some silent time. And what I want you to do is ask yourself on this new trajectory. So it's no longer a choice between one or the other. It's from this point forward versus where I've been, where I'm going to, what's possible. As I take in each new breath, what am I feeding? What life is available to me? Who can I be in this space? Without bounds, without limitations, without any rules of the past. Who can I be? Who am I? So again, I'm going to give us some silent time for writing. Just asking yourself with each breath that comes in, what's possible for me? For those people watching video, you can pause the video for writing. That's going to be for people on YouTube. Right now, I'm going to keep it live. So if you're on live, you can just go ahead and start writing. You don't need to hit pause. But when I edit this, I will be having people pause the video. So I wanted to say that. So I'm going to give a silent time now, beginning now. What's possible? Who can I be in this new space with this new breath? So that then when we get into sharing, I'll just turn off the live video. So to follow up at home, again, sitting in the same meditation, it's one, that should be pretty easy to move through all the phases with. So all the stages of meditation. So if you sit down and just start becoming aware of your breath and then being aware of that in breath and that out breath. I like the way this worked out and the fact that the word exhale means to expire, to breathe out, or expiration. And so there's a term actually in the dictionary that cease to exist, which I love that idea in letting go of aspects of ourselves that no longer serve us. Let them cease to exist because they had their time. We lived in that state and we had that experience, and now we're ready for new experience. And inspire does mean to breathe in and of course bring things to life. And it's really interesting that it happens that way. The very last thing we do when we die is exhale. The very first thing we do when we live is that big inhale, right? So, well, initially we're living in the womb and get fed oxygen and stuff. But when we start life on our own, it starts with an inhale of breath. And so I like to think of that all new life is inhale is inspiration. And that as we exhale, that's expiration. So everything we express out, once it's expressed, it's done. We've had that experience. So continuing that and making sure you go through the phases. So making sure you stop and do some breathing before, and then do the centering practice of becoming highly aware before you try to get into writing. But we do want to make sure we get to writing. Don't just sit in the space. We need to articulate it. Talked about that a little bit tonight in the intro to meditation. 20 minutes of meditative practices a day is what I recommend. If you can do the full 20 minutes in the state of active listening where you're writing for 20 minutes, that's great. So if setting up your meditation practice takes 10 minutes, if you can still write for 20, that's great. But just doing at least, as much as you can of the full meditation practice, even if it becomes, well, I didn't write, but I was still working to get myself centered. Keep doing that. Don't give up just because we can't get into that state. Again, there's a lot of resources online and information. Also, while I'm here, I don't know if it's live yet, but I did publish another book called The Practices, and it takes people through phase 1, 2, and introduces to 3. It is fantastic if you haven't solidified the concept that our experience of life is the result of chemistry, or haven't gained the ability to control chemistry. It's very well thought out. I spend a lot of time thinking of how to walk people through the practices. So it doesn't give the information on how brain function works, but it does give a walkthrough exercise of all the practices. For people that are already in the practices and want to practice journal, I also uploaded that. It's also in review. It's called Ongoing Practices Journal. But if you look me up on Amazon, and if you look up Linda Forrest and the Inspired Evolution Project, those are subtitles in both books, so you should be able to find it. If anybody has any issues, let me know. So anyway, a lot more will be coming available. Again, go on the inspiredevolutionproject.com and save it to your phone, and you'll get updates on everything I'm doing. I will be posting a lot. A lot of the videos will be available on the website, as well as some live classes that I'm going to be doing so that people can do classes from home by video. If they're not there for the live, they'll still have a chance to access the videos. So new direction. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and end the live video on Facebook. If anybody has any questions, you can write them in the comments, and I should be able to get to them tomorrow. So I'm going to end that, and then we're going to go into, for the people here, having an opportunity